an American environmentalist, has sparked controversy in green circles following controversial remarks in his latest book, Apocalypse Never: Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. Michael Shellenberger, the co-founder of the think tank Environmental Progress, has countered claims that a vegetarian diet is beneficial for the environment. He also attacks the myth that plastics linger for thousands of years in the ocean, saying they are broken down, in fact, by sunlight and other forces. Shellenberger has gone against the grain of traditional environmentalist movements, describing the apocalyptic view of climate change as an evangelical fundamentalist religion that doesn't respond to rational arguments. Michael joins us now. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
It's a pleasure. So talk us through it then. What happened? Is this poacher turned gamekeeper, as we might say over here? What is the reverse gear that has happened with Michael Shellenberger?
Well, I've been an environmentalist for over 30 years. I've been a climate activist for over 20 years, but I'm also the father of a 14-year-old girl. She's fine because I explain the science to her, but many of her friends aren't sure if they're going to live long enough to have kids. And after Greta Thunberg made those remarks last year, encouraging people to panic, which is by definition unthinking action, and after Extinction Rebellion declared that billions would die from climate change, my conscience urged me to speak out. I felt it was just not right to be terrifying children like this. 1 out of 5 British children say they have nightmares about climate change. This is totally inappropriate. Climate change is real, but it's not the most serious environmental problem in the world. It's not the end of the world. And we need to be telling kids the truth. There's many other things that they need to be worried about. And there's a lot of good news, including the fact that carbon emissions peaked in Britain, France, and Germany in the mid-70s and are going to peak probably in the next decade or so. So I really object to this alarmism, and that's why I wrote Apocalypse Never.
Does that mean I'm okay to eat burgers and drive my gas-guzzling 4x4?
I mean, this is one of the most surprising things I discovered in my research for Apocalypse Never, which is that going vegetarian only reduces your carbon emissions 2 to 4%. That's pretty shocking. That's actually a number I didn't even realize until I did the research. Most of the things that people worry about, plastic straws, eating meat, these are not significant environmental problems. The biggest environmental problem remains poverty. There's still 1 to 2 billion people in the world that use wood as fuel. There's still people that eat wild animals. We still eat wild fish. We should be eating farmed fish. There are real environmental problems, but what's occurring in the West is a neurosis. It's a kind of OCD that is affecting people. It's really unfair, and it particularly impacts adolescents. And that's the kind of thing that I think we all need to be concerned about.
Yeah, there was I don't know if there's been so much imagery. I'm thinking of the Extinction Rebellion protests. I just remember famously on our news in this country, there was a guy who I think he glued himself to the wheel of a police car or something, and so the interviewer had to kind of lay down on the pavement next to him to interview him, and the guy was crying his eyes out. And the interviewer said, "Why are you crying?" And he pulled out a photograph of his kids. He said, "This is why I'm doing this." And, because these kids are going to have the planet will be dead by the time, they get to 20 or something. Now, I couldn't qualify my response to it, Michael, and you might be able to help me out here, but I had an overwhelming instinctive sense that he was wrong about something. I was working on the basis that no leader, as far as I can ascertain, whether it's Trump, whether it's potentially Biden, whether it's Boris Johnson or Mr. Macron in France, these will be the guys responsible for it. And I can't imagine they want to be responsible for what man on the floor glued to the truck was telling us.
Well, yeah, I was actually in London last year during the Extinction Rebellion protests, where the claims were made that billions of people were died. I saw people gluing themselves to police barricades in Trafalgar Square. I saw some very terrible things, including mothers holding up signs saying that climate change kills children. There are things that people need to know. The number of deaths from natural disasters has declined over 90% over the last 100 years at a time when the human population quadrupled. The new data appears to suggest that this year, the first half of 2020, will have fewer deaths from natural disasters in recorded history. We should be celebrating these successes. we're making incredible progress towards protecting ourselves and our children from extreme weather events. So, another example is we are not causing a sixth mass extinction. In fact, the amount of land that we use for meat production, which is the most significant use of land on Earth by humans, has peaked and started going down. It's gone down almost the size of Alaska over the last 20 years. So anybody that actually has been reading the news on the environment has been getting misinformed. My book is 1/4 of my book, over 100 pages in my book of Apocalypse Never, is references, the best available science. I was invited by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change last year to be an expert reviewer. Everything I'm saying is mainstream science. And I really blame the news media. No disrespect to all of you, but the news media has badly misinformed the public about this. It's whipped up a hysteria that I think is really more what I describe in the book as more of a religious movement. The good news is there are people coming out of it. I met Zion Lights. She was an Extinction Rebellion spokesperson. I recently hired her to help us in our campaign in Britain, because Britain, it turns out, is considering building new nuclear power plants. Maybe one of the most surprising things is that nuclear energy is our safest and cleanest form of energy, but it's also been the victim of 50 years of alarmism by apocalyptic environmentalists.
Yeah, well, it has the word nuclear in there, doesn't it? And that's arguably its biggest problem, that it sounds like something terrible might just happen. In terms of the wider picture, though, I mean, I think a lot of people will be encouraged by what you said. It might allay some fears from those that have watched the news over recent years and thought, are we all going to die inside 2 decades? But of course, there are a lot of scientists out there, Michael, that will be listening to this saying, hang on a second, this guy's talking hogwash. The climate is warming up. We know that's how the planet is warming, and it's going to get to levels that will be unsustainable. So what do you say to those scientists that say, hang on, we've got the data on our side, not on your side?
I mean, I agree. Climate change is occurring. It is something that we should do something about. That's why I favor transitioning from coal to natural gas, which is what Britain has been doing for decades. I also support nuclear energy, which produces 0 carbon emissions and is the safest way to make electricity. But these exaggerations are really out of control. I have seen many alarmist scientists, I think, letting their ego and their desire for publicity get in the way of good science.
But it's mostly the whole world of science. Sorry to interject, but most of science, there is a consensus here, it seems. Or am I just following bad news?
There's the consensus that climate change is occurring. I'd say there's a consensus among scientists that it's happening. There's also a majority of scientists that think nuclear energy is the solution. But it's not the case that most scientists are apocalyptic. There's a small group of activist scientists who grab the headlines. They make extreme statements. I interviewed them all in my book. I pressed them to justify some of the outrageous statements they were saying. I'll give you one more example. We produce 25% more food in the world than we need. Whenever there's famines, it's because of some war going on or some battle. Somebody is deliberately trying to starve somebody. There is not a serious risk of running out of food. That's the only way you can come up with mass deaths in the future. The keys to growing more food are fertilizer, irrigation, and tractors. It's pretty simple stuff. We can grow food in many different climates around the world. Or take another example, sea level rise. The median sea level rise estimate is 0.5 meter, about 0.6 meters. Well, the Netherlands became a rich country while farming, in many cases, 7 meters below sea level. They had to become, engineers. They had to become innovative. This idea that humans are helpless victims of our natural environment, it's exactly the opposite. In fact, most of our environmental problems, including the loss of wild animals, the loss of habitat for wild animal species, is because humans are so good at adapting to our natural environment. So I think we got to get back to the things that really matter when it comes to protecting the natural environment. We want to protect rainforests. We want to protect wetlands. We want to protect special ecosystems and endangered species. This hysteria around climate change is destructive to mental health. It's harming adolescents. And it's leading, the worst part of it, Ian, honestly, and I describe this in detail in Apocalypse Never, is the influence of many radical environmentalists, apocalyptic environmentalists, to deny poor countries the cheap energy and the modern agricultural techniques that they need to become wealthy, developed nations like Britain and the United States. I think that's unethical. It's one of the major reasons that I wrote this. Is why the book tells stories from my travels in Africa and Asia and Latin America. People that are poor want to live modern lives. They should not be denied that by the richest people on earth.
And what do you say about weather, extreme weather conditions and phenomena? I'm thinking of things like tsunamis, seasons changing. The Australian bushfires is another great example. 3,000 homes almost destroyed. The fires burnt 16.5 million acres of 6.5 million hectares of land, 46 million acres, 186,000 square kilometers. I mean, these are huge, and many people, of course, apply that and other issues surrounding extremities in our weather to climate change. True or false?
Well, this is one of the most interesting things I discovered while doing the research for Apocalypse Never, which is that while it's true, you can find evidence that some extreme weather events, such as heat waves, hurricanes, and floods, are becoming somewhat worse. That's different than natural disasters. A disaster is defined by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and every dictionary as the impact of extreme weather on people and property. And so if a hurricane doesn't touch ground, if a hurricane is a little bit more severe but doesn't cause more damage or kill more people, then you can't claim that climate change is making disasters worse. In fact, climate change could not be making natural disasters worse because natural disasters are getting better. The number of people dying from hurricanes and floods, which are the two main natural disasters that kill people and cause damage, has been going down because of very simple weather forecasting, storm shelters in Bangladesh, more hardened infrastructure. Sure. Or take the forest fires. The two biggest factors behind increased forest fire severity and frequency is that we've suppressed the fires that had been burning up the wood fuel, which is accumulating in the forest and leads to hotter, worse fires. And there's just more homes near forests. That's the case in both California and Australia. It's true that there's a longer fire season, but that does not explain the more intense or frequent fires that we've seen in both places.
Okay, listen, Michael, it's fascinating stuff. I do hope we speak again on this. I'm sure we will.